Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today we are joined by Jeff Stifler, Director of Product Marketing Healthcare at Cognosis. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor Cognosis. Now Cognosis utilizes the power of AI to transform tracking data into operational intelligence, redefining the value of location solutions. They help hospitals reduce costs, optimize clean room operations, and improve staff safety with their RTLS and staff to-rest solutions. Cognosis is able to quickly deploy a system with room-level accuracy without room-level equipment that excels in complex environments, producing value from day one. So for more information, please visit cognosis.com. Now, just a quick reminder to save a date for our Spring MD Expo, which will be held at the Pechanga Resort Casino in Temecula, California, and that's April the 15th to the 17th. So please join us for 3 days of education, networking, and the latest advances in medical technology products and services. For more information and registration details, please visit mdexposhow.com. And also, voting is open online through January the 10th, 2025 for our second annual Tech Choice Awards. Now, TechNation is honoured to be part of these awards that are 100% nominated by and voted by the HTM industry. Please visit onetechnation.com/Tech Choice Awards to vote for all categories, and the winners will be announced in the March issue of TechNation. Okay, today's webinar is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our Webinar Wednesday 10th anniversary prizes. Today's prize is a $100 Lowe's gift card. So using the questions feature on your dashboard, let me know the answer to the following trivia question. Which city hosts the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade? I'll reveal the answer and our winner at the end of the webinar. We'll be wrapping up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit your question anytime using the questions feature on the webinar dashboard. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our presenter today is Jeff. So Jeff, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Very good, thank you, Linda. So today's topic will be how AI location intelligence can enhance PAR level automation and equipment distribution. But before we kind of get into the topic, the who am I? So I have, as I date myself, 20 plus years of healthcare experience ranging from medical device, and then most recently spent the last better half of about the decade in RTLS systems. So have extensive experience in the hospital, working in the hospital, as well as on the outside doing product development strategy and leading the commercialization function. So with that, I'll kind of get into the meat of the topic. It's a very simple question of like, what is PAR? I think everyone on this call knows what PAR is. In case you don't, PAR is just an acronym for periodic automatic replacement, which just seems relatively simple and straightforward. But it's as straightforward as it seems. Why is it so hard to actually have availability of equipment? So why is this problem pervasive in most hospitals that I go to? Is they just simply don't have equipment. They don't have enough equipment. It's not in the right spot. So how is such a simple definition so challenging to achieve? And then from there, we'll kind of go like, 2 main reasons that I hear from customers talk about it. The first one kind of being like, we don't work in these like super harmonious places, right? I mean, while hospitals are fantastic and have processes and procedures, the reality is patient care is chaotic and it is complicated and it is ever changing. So we don't have the luxury of, like, I'll call it making a widget, right? I add one thing to the next thing and it makes this. So we operate in these things that are more resemblance of this, right? Everything's constantly moving. There's good processes and you have somewhat predictability, but at the end of the day, like everything's kind of unique, right? And sometimes patients just don't cooperate, and diseases just don't cooperate, and staff just don't cooperate. So, I mean, fundamentally, it is a simple question. It is a simple concept of PAR, but it's very challenging to do it really, really well. One of which is because of the environments we operate in. And then second, the technology that's there to accommodate it. And we're going to really talk about the combination of both, with a lot of it being the actual technology aspect of it. So what we know about, I'll call it par leveling and machine availability, is it resembles kind of a domino effect, right? And I think people on the phone who have the managed equipment can relate to this. Is typically if you have, I'll call it 500 IV pumps and everything seems good, and then there's this one instance where they don't have enough IV pumps, right? COVID's a great example. They don't have enough of something. So then a good nurse or a good unit or a good clinician basically says, hey, I'm gonna keep this IV pump back, right? I'm gonna keep this as my safety stock because last time I went to get one, there wasn't one there. I really needed it. The patient had to delay something, so I'm gonna keep my safety stock, right? And that's that one person, or maybe it's a unit, and maybe that's not one unit, maybe it's like 5 IV pumps or five bladder scanners or 5 telemetry packs, right? And then that's repeated over and over and over again. So it becomes like this domino effect. And then eventually you get to the point where there's simply just, at that point, not enough IV pumps in circulation. So then you say, hey, we need to buy more stuff, or we need to rent more stuff. So now you're absorbing all these extra expenses that the hospital really doesn't need to do, because you actually have enough if they were all in circulation, all in distribution, but they're simply not. And then you have all this adaptive behavior that follows, right? So you have rental expenses that go up. You're buying machines that you really don't need. And then you have procedure delays because you don't have the equipment at the right spots. So now patients are having to wait for service, or something takes longer than it should, or something that you had to have. And then now you have people looking for machines all over the place. So you're wasting biomed's time, you're wasting nursing time simply to find a machine versus doing something that has a lot more value added. And then lastly, you got this last kind of pillar is like this regulatory risk, right? So heaven forbid you have to do preventative maintenance. You have your list. It is, we'll call it November. You've got to do these 75 pumps, but you only find 55 of them. So what do you do with the other 20? Because they're hidden somewhere. You just don't know where. And it can be challenging to find those last 20. So you find the first 50, okay, but then that last chunk could take you a long time to find it, right? And again, it could just go back to this domino effect of things that go wrong when you're not operating correctly. And then it just snowballs into a lot of problems. And this is why, all the reasons why par leveling is challenging from a variety of reasons. So if you think about like, how do you get to par leveling? Like, what is needed for par leveling? I mean, at the end of the day, you want the right-hand side. You want the right equipment in the right place at the right time, preferably clean. So step one is you have to be able to locate it. Where is the machine? It sounds like a really simple concept, but most hospitals that I've encountered, getting 100% inventory at any given period is exceptionally challenging. They can find a lot of them, but to find every single one that they should have is always a little bit challenging. So step one is to locate it. Step two is then to take that location and then understand the process. So if you are a facility that uses clean room and dirty rooms, getting staff members and getting biomed and getting all the pieces that affect the product to move in the right sequence, to move in the same direction. So making sure once a pump or a machine is used, it's then put back into dirty, and then biomed make sure they go and grab the dirty machine, clean it, and then put it back where it's supposed to be, back and clean, so it can be then redistributed again. So that's typically step two, is just getting the process down, right? And that's challenging because it also means getting change management of people down, right? It's breaking bad habits. I think what I've heard from visiting customer sites is, if they were down this path where like maybe they didn't have one great, but they had two pretty good, they had the process down. As soon as COVID hit, all rules were broken. And it's been really hard to kind of get back in that groove because people picked up really bad habits. And there was a shortage of equipment, specifically around the pulmonary stuff. But, step one is locating. Step two is getting the process implemented. And then step three is that critical part of like, what do you actually do with the data? So are you improving utilization rates? Are you improving turn rates? Do you actually have the number of machines? Most people I've talked to said like they probably have more machines than they need because of the domino effect, right? They couldn't find them, so they bought more. So now you're basically doing decisions based on data, and you can kind of see where the process has broken down in some instances. Who are the bad acting floors, right? Who's not rotating enough? Who's not putting in circulation fast enough? What is the actual utilization? Where should they actually be, right? Floor 2 says they need 50. The reality is they need 20. So you start kind of like having a single source of truth of what is happening, and you fundamentally get a better understanding of your whole process. It really kind of peels the onion back on how are our machines distributed throughout the organization, how are they being utilized, and what is the true demand and what is the true utilization of these equipment, so you can make adjustments on the fly. And you can continue to do that, all of which leads to par level, right? So being able to have the right machine at the right place is critical, because at the end of the day, if you just stuck with one, if you just did locating, all you're doing is outsourcing the searching to someone else, right? You're not really solving the problem of having the equipment where you want it. You're just giving them the ability to go find it when they need it, which I guess it's better than nothing. But the end goal is always like the effective equipment distribution, because that's what really allows you to realize the ROI. And that's what allows you to realize the benefits. So going back to the previous slide, is the operational benefits. You're not wasting people's time. You're not wasting money on renting equipment that you already have. You're not buying more equipment that you don't need. You reduce the compliance risk, and then you also then reduce the time, the time and effort that, and the frustration that people have when they simply can't provide care or something's delayed for a patient. So invariably, what I have experienced in my career is if you get the first 3 right, maybe even 2 of the 3, it leads to continuous improvement and expansion, because you prove the model out. You have shown the ROI of how this can benefit things, and then you're either going to add more stuff or you're going to expand it to different areas. So it's not, it's super common, I should say. It's really common to start with 1 or 2 or 3 items, right? IV pumps, because of the volume of them, is a super common one. Telemetry packs, bladder scanners, like those are all kind of common first items. And then typically when it goes really well, then everyone starts talking about, well, what else can we put these things on? Because this is fantastic. We have the right stuff. How do we find more of our stuff more often? So it then just tends to expand and improve, and you continue to make strides in your par level as you continue to know what your process is. Everything then just operates more and more smoothly. So these at a really high level, like this is kind of the end game, right? This is what it kind of looks like. So at this point, you're saying, okay, I understand PAR, I understand how this is a benefit, but what does AI has anything to do with it? And specifically AI as a location engine. So I'm going to take maybe 5 minutes or so and just try to, at a really high level, explain how AI can work as a locating engine. So the biggest thing that we look at is the infrastructure. So if you have, for example, an infrared or an ultrasound or even BLE, the green dots are basically the infrastructure you need. So call it the hardware. And honestly, this may be actually underreported, because you would actually even put the hardware sometimes in the hallways, hallways, sorry, the hallways with the corridors. So this is actually maybe even slightly underrepresented, but fundamentally you have an enormous amount of hardware that needs to be installed in order to have room level accuracy. And that room level accuracy is going to come again later on, is again to get par level. If you think about par level being how many things are in a patient room or in a clean room or in a dirty room, you'll notice one thing I keep saying over and over again is in the room. So in order to have effective par leveling, you really need to have in-room accuracy, because that kind of, for most systems, where it's at dictates if it's available, if it's clean, or if it's dirty. So it's the location-based decisions. So the accuracy level becomes super important, which is why you have all this infrastructure. So the takeaway from this, though, is that every dot you see is an expense. So it's 1 dot you have to install, it's 1 dot you have to buy, and then it's 1 dot you have to maintain over and over and over again. So the fundamental thing that AI as a location engine does is it changes from this infrastructure to something like this. So infrastructure is placed very sporadically throughout, intentful but sporadic. You need a fraction, call it less than half of the infrastructure, which also means less than half of the equipment purchase, less than half of the installation, less than half of the maintenance that you have to pay then every year. So obviously there's significant upfront expense advantages to this. And there's numerous others, but I mean, this is kind of like the blueprint of like the biggest one is that infrastructure that you don't need anymore with an AI-enabled location. As a quick overview, how does it work? Like the left-hand box, so we'll call it location training or model training, you may hear. So you train the model. The model then tells you, correlates the input to a room, and then this visualization, the box on the right. Now, this is the same as everything else, right? You get a visualization, whether it be on a map, whether it be on a list. You can choose typically how you want to see your information. So we're going to kind of ignore the box on the right, because if you're familiar with RTLS systems, that's going to look the same across all platforms. It's the visualization of you're looking for bladder scanner, what room is it in? It's going to show you a little dot on a map, or it's going to show you a line item on a table that basically says it's in room 454. On the first two boxes, I'm going to just kind of explain. So on the floor plan, in AI, you can have to train the models. It doesn't matter what AI, across any industry, you have to teach the model what to do. So in this instance, location engine, you're teaching it the hospital layout. And in the instance of location AI as an engine, you're basically, for lack of better terms, you're basically taking a radio wave picture of a given room. We're going to have 30 pictures of this room, and we're going to say, when a radio wave looks like these 30 pictures, that is room 454. And then we're going to do the next room, right? And these 25 pictures have a slightly different radio wave image, and those look like room 554. And then when you actually have an emission from a tag, it's going to send these pictures up to the server. So that's just location engine in the middle, and it's going to say, oh, based on what I'm seeing, it's either an exact match or it's the closest match to this image that I know in my model. It is room, that tag is now in room 454. So from a visualization standpoint, this is always kind of helpful for me when I was first learning about the AI model. Is it basically sends these pattern of radio waves to the model. The AI then adjusts it and basically stores this, and then whenever the new one comes in, it says, okay, here's my picture. Which one of these pictures does it most closely represent? And that is fundamentally how you get away with being able to get room level accurate with very little hardware, because we can actually utilize this model to actually do it. The other nice thing about AI is, if you see, is it's obviously rapidly advancing. It's extremely popular today, but we actually can have it learn, right? So over time, accuracy tends to get better, whereas in traditional RTLS systems, where the physical layout may change some, or you cut a wire, or there's all kinds of things that can change that environment. It's the inverse, right? In traditional RTL systems, over time, they degrade without a lot of maintenance. In the instance of AI, they actually improve because of the machine learning. The accuracy tends to improve over time. So, as a quick, really, really high level view, like that's AI. I guess the next question is then, so what does AI have to do with PAR? And I touched on it briefly earlier, but it starts with that accuracy statement. We talk about in-room accurate. So it's a general categorization, right? Like infrared, ultrasound, ultra wideband, they are all accurate, in-room accurate. So there's proven technology, they've been around for a while, but the same hitch applies to all of these, is that it is expensive to install. So going back to that traditional model where you saw all the green dots, what I've seen in most instances, that installation and expense hardware is typically also the barrier for entry, right? So it's a pretty big price tag to put it in. And subsequently, that either does one of two things. It dissuades people from actually buying a system, or they buy a system and they cut corners a little bit here and there to meet budgets. They only do part of the facility versus the whole facility, or they kind of skimp here and there, and it leads to less optimal results. Or lastly, they put the system in, but the ROI becomes challenging because of that upfront expense. So there's no doubt that a lot of technology can reach in-room accuracy, but from a practical standpoint, a lot of times they don't. And then going back to why is that applicable to PAR, it's because if you really want an accurate PAR system, you really have to know pretty precisely where the machine is. If you're only doing locating, it's slightly less important, because you can peek around a corner and kind of find it. But to do PAR level, which is the ultimate value creation, you really have to be accurate in its location to actually know where exactly it is. And maybe case in point, right? So if Biomed or whoever actually circulates your machines are running around, and you're getting, I'll call it a false positive, And your hope was you'd have no false positives or maybe 5% false positives, but the location accuracy is off 20%. You're still making 20% of the trips that you shouldn't have to make. So better than nothing, however, is not as efficient as you could be. So when we dwell about in-room accuracy, it's really important to peel away what exactly does that mean and how is it going to be implemented within your system. I've always liked that. It's like, if you look at maybe this representative example, the green box is your clean room, the orange box is a soiled room, and the yellow box is a patient. If you are in room, or I'll call it near room accurate, or you have a infrastructure that doesn't quite yield the in-room accuracy, what is the system going to tell you where that machine is? It actually may be in the clean room, but it may show as in the patient room or in the hallway, which means from a practical standpoint, it's not going to show as available, even though it is. And alternatively, if it's actually dirty and need to be cleaned, it's not going to show in dirty. It's going to show in the hallway, or even worst case, the clean room, when it's actually in a patient room. So no one's coming to come service that, which then still has your fundamental problem of machines aren't being circulated to their fullest extent, and you still have this a little bit of the domino effect. You may have less of the domino effect, but you still have some of the domino effect because the stuff's not moving as efficiently and accurately as it needs to be. So when we point out, like, what is accuracy? So peeling away definitions of accuracy becomes super important, because that'll kind of allow you to understand how accurate is your par level going to be. So if assuming there are no professional dart throwers, this is a good analogy, but assuming there's no dart throwers on this call, if so, then you're at the next slide. But for all of us average dart throwers who go to a pub or a bar or in your basement, wherever you have a dartboard, we're going to throw, let's say, 100 darts. And of those 100 darts, we are going to hit the bullseye sometimes, right? It's not going to be a high percentage, but we're going to hit the bullseye sometimes. Sometimes we're going to hit the wall behind it and have to make drywall patches. But fundamentally, we're going to hit the bullseye sometimes. So you would ask, how'd you do? Did you hit bullseye? Yes. That's kind of the same as in-room accuracy. Can you get the machine in the room? Sure. 1 out of 100 times, and obviously I'm being dramatic here, but yes, machine's in the right spot some of the times, right? Again, going back to the actual accuracy matters and par level efficiency, you really, really want that machine. You need that machine to be accurate a lot of the time. So if you take this picture of average novice dart throwers and you compare it to a pro will also hit the bullseye, but their bullseye looks like that, right? So they're consistently in the middle-ish, not always perfect, but very reliably in that center spot. So as you correlate this to par leveling, you really need a professional. You really need the pro dart thrower, because your data and your process revolves around this accuracy. And if this is not accurate enough, you'll be slightly better than what you were, but you're going to fall well short of expectations of what you really want to be. And that's, to put the right equipment at the right place so everyone can use it. So that's fundamentally what you're playing for. So when we peel back the actual notion and understanding of accuracy, it's really, really important to understand how accurate. And that can be measured in a handful of ways. It can be measured in, like, for example, how often you actually have the correct location, as well as how consistently you have that location. So it's kind of like two metrics, right? Do you get the location right, and how often do you get it right? Those both have to be answered to really understand how good your par leveling will actually perform in a real world environment. So what is par level? Like, very real. So obviously when clean room and dirty room are right next to each other, it becomes problematic, but it is equally problematic if they're across the hall. So it doesn't matter if things are right on top of each other. You fundamentally still need to have in-room accuracy for a high accuracy par leveling system. And then you ask, okay, so AI. So it feels like AI, for good reason, AI in itself has become very pervasive, right? You hear AI is everywhere, but, like, what exactly is AI? So if you're looking at RTLS providers, what does AI look like, and what actually has value? So going back to the dartboard, right? A lot of AIs that you see today build data on top of other data. right? So if you think about ChatGPT or Gemini or the various providers that have it, they're fundamentally looking for other people's data to give you data. And that fundamentally asks for, is the underlying data accurate enough? And that's why if you look at like the small print, it basically tells you. So the question becomes is, if you are using AI, like what type of AI? Because not all AI is created equal. So there are different applications of AI and how it's applied. So really, really important for you as as potential buyers or potential utilizations of this AI technology is to understand how is that company using AI, because AI in itself may or may not help par level at all. So for example, a lot of times in RTLS, it's used at a reporting level. So it's taking underlying location data that was derived from other technologies, and they may use it as a reporting tool. So you can use basically apply the proverbial garbage in, garbage out technology, right? So going back, I'll kind of skip back up here. If you go back to this scenario where the data, the location data is kind of all over the place. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. And you build a reporting platform on top of that, the insight that you get is going to be equally as good as the data that you put into it. So it may grossly mislead where exactly you actually need to do it. And again, going back to par leveling, if you want to get the most value, it has to be accurate. So the type of AI that you're going to use becomes really important, because location AI as a location intelligence is what basically gives you the groundswell of data that actually is super accurate. So really, really important that the data going into the model that any reporting is driven off of, and fundamentally, the decisions that are being driven will be accurate as well. So that was what allows you to then have confidence in your answer and then realize your ROI and all the other fun stuff that people want when they buy RTLS systems. So going back, I mean, I think that those are some of the key criteria when you think about it. Now, in an overarching, going back to how does AI and par leveling, it's kind of like I'll say a conclusion or in a summary of everything. Using AI and using that next technology, what we know from previous RTLS platforms that use other technology, you can reach par level accuracy, you can get good results, but they typically become prohibitive when it comes to expense and implementation. So the thing that turns the page when using AI for par is that it allows you to basically do that entire facility and get room level accuracy without all the expense. So you can basically pivot all the way to par leveling once you're, as an organization, are ready to do that. You already have the infrastructure in place to do it. So like you have the accuracy already in place, you have the infrastructure in place because you don't need that much of it, and you can kind of pivot all the way to do par leveling basically at the start or when your facility is actually ready to get all that in place, because you're going to need the process as well. So important when you go through, AI very much enables doing par leveling because of the lack of infrastructure that it requires, because of the accuracy it gives and the consistency of the accuracy it gives out of the box, as well as over time, because again, accuracy tends to improve, not degrade over time. So with that, I will stop, Linda, and open it back up for any questions that people may have.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. We've got a few that have come in. The first one is, how are the benefits of an RTLS asset management system typically quantified?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I kind of touched on them earlier. So typically the easiest to measure, the most quantifiable hard, they call hard numbers, right, is can you reduce the overbuys and the rentals that we discussed? So when many people look at what is the ROI, like what are you trying to get out of it, the primary two indicators are we still buying, how much money are we spending in rentals? Did we reduce that number? How many machines are we buying every year? Are we still buying that number? And those are kind of your top two. And then from that, you also then have ancillary benefits of how much time is then now spent or not spent running around kind of looking for machines. So there's definitely it's not a hard, fast number, but there's the morale and satisfaction that, if you're a biomed on the call, I'm sure you've had maybe nurses or someone in clinical yell that they can't find machines, that there's not enough machines, those go away. Having spent years in this industry, like sometimes that in itself is a driver for a purchase of simply like helping the clinical team take care of patients better, right? It's hard to quantify, but it is immensely helpful. So what we typically see is the justification for the system is typically driven by the financial metrics, right? The hard financial metrics of overbuys and rental, basically dramatically lowering those. You then get ancillary benefits of like you can actually understand utilization rates. You can make good purchasing decisions on what is actually needed. You then get a lot of human capital back, right? You get a lot of time spent that's not being spent looking for machines. I mean, there's actually good studies that nurses spend about 10 to 15% of their day just looking for stuff. Biomed, I have to assume, is about the same. So, you get all that human capital back. And then lastly, no one, it's super hard to quantify until it happens, but you reduce that risk, right? So heaven forbid joint come in, they find the secret stash, preventative maintenance was supposed to be done 4 months ago, it is not calibrated, but there it is, and now you have a compliance problem. So there's a whole bunch of ways, but those are typically the order of operations that we see them from an importance standpoint.
Great. Another question here is, how can we get support from other teams inside the hospital to get this approved?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, right? So I think when we see it, it all depends kind of who starts the process, right? So it's not unusual for biomed or operations to kind of start the process because they're the ones who have to deal with the problem. But you really need clinical to chime in and say, yes, like this is a significant problem, because at the end of the day, a lot of this boils down to patient care, right? So aside from the financial gain or financial savings, I should say, fundamentally, hospitals are in the business to take care of patients. And the unspoken problem with all this is if you can't find a machine, there are certainly times where that could affect patient care, or at the very minimum, you taking a nurse away or a clinician away from doing their job 10 to 15% of their day to look for stuff, that's 10 to 15% of the time that they're not caring for a patient. So when you think about support, typically it starts with I'll call it the business case, which is why those metrics come in. And then it is super helpful to then go and have a clinician be on your side to say, hey, this would, have a CNO or a director or whatever level that typically is in your buying committee pattern, stand up and help you and say, this would be exceptionally helpful for me if I had this solution, because if I can stop looking for machines, X, Y, and Z problems go away for me. That's another one. The IT people, like if you can, I'll speak specific to AI, because of the infrastructure and because it's cloud-based, that becomes a softer burden on IT, right? So if you can introduce a solution that has very little burden for the IT department, they're less likely to basically say, I don't have time to do that. So if you build about the support, right, you think about operation says I can spend less money on machines, I can improve my operations. You got clinicians saying this would really, really help me. You got IT saying this isn't a burden for me, I don't have any concerns. And then again, going back to the ROI, you have the CFO saying, wow, this system costs X. I used to spend 3 or 4X on that, on machines, on rentals and machines every year. From an ROI perspective, this makes 100% sense of why I would do this. That typically is your buying committee, some segment of that, or sometimes all of them. So it's kind of like finding the benefit for each department and having them kind of pitch in to say, this is what would positively benefit me when implementing an RTLS, especially in par level. If you can get the equipment distribution part down really, really well, you'll realize by far the most value, and it kind of checks all the boxes to make everyone happy.
Great. So how do you track and measure the ROI for your RTLS system?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So I think I've covered a little bit of it. So typically you would do like, what was your rental? So what a lot of hospitals do is, they do implementation. Typically you give people a period of time, I'll call it the grace period, where they said they get everything up and running, going back to I can find the machines now I get to get the process in place, now I'm going to analyze data. So there's this grace period between locating the process to when you actually start measuring. But once you start measuring, you can do it in a handful of ways, right? So it's super common, or you should think about what was your rental expense, I'll call it pre-implementation. So take a historical look, how much did you spend on renting machines? So take that number and then after you have an implementation, see like, are you still renting the same amount of machines and what is the differential? Same thing on equipment purchases. So how many machines did you buy every year versus how many machines do you actually have to have? The assumption and typically what happens is you would buy 100 machines every year, regardless of census. Are you now buying 100-year machines this year, or did you take it down to 20, or did you buy 0 because you actually found all your machines? So each institution, each facility is a little bit different in how much of an impact that is based on where your starting point is. But then also you can start fine tuning things, especially again, going back to PARs, you can start fine tuning things and talk about like what is the utilization rates, right? So if you take one step back in the instance of you have 1,000 pumps and you'd buy 100 pumps every year to replace the ones you couldn't find, you'd eventually have 1,100, then 1,200, and 1,300 machines. The reality is when you started, you may not have even needed 1,000 pumps if you're doing things really well. You may actually have only needed 900. So this is an illustrative example. Year one, maybe you eliminate the extra 100. Year two, you eliminate the extra 100, and you're able to actually reduce down your fleet from 1,000 units to 980, right? Those are all ROI metrics that kind of go into playing this out. And then if you want to get really good at the math, you would then quantify like, what was saved with people's time. So depending on how complex you want to make and compelling you want to make the math, you can do multiple angles of where this would save you. People's time, hard cost, compliance or risk, right? So how much does one JCO, Joint Commission violation cost you? So there's all kinds of ways to justify the expense. It's really where you feel comfortable and you have the data that will support your case. But in most instances, the vast majority of the value is delineated in that rental and overbuy category.
Great. So does this system add on to already installed RTLS?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some suppliers can certainly do, some people they would call it hardware agnostic, right? So you could take existing RTLS infrastructure, and RTLS infrastructure is a very wide definition. So for example, if you have a newer hospital where the newer hospital actually has BLE in the lighting systems, or maybe you had an old RTL system that is no longer functional or partially functional. There are certainly systems that are hardware agnostic that can digest the signals and information and then give you location data. It is certainly kind of if you can use existing hardware, is very facility and platform dependent. So the overall answer is most people can figure out how to do it, some easier than others. And then it'd be a matter of, can you use your existing hardware? Is it financially feasible or viable to do that? Will you still get the accuracy that you want by using that, or will it actually just be cheaper or cost neutral to go a different route that would still yield you the same result? So by and large, there are certainly vendors that are hardware agnostic, but it's a complicated question because it's going to be very dependent upon what vet platform you're using, and are they hardware agnostic? What equipment do you actually have, and how accurate is that? Does it meet the accuracy that you're expecting? And then will they all play nice together and meet your expectations? So overall, yes. I mean, it is possible. It really comes down to a question of can you do it? Yes. Does it meet your end goal? Maybe. Very site specific, very platform specific question.
Great. Another question just come in. What is the investment for a system like this?
Yeah, so excellent question. Probably the second question we get is outside of how does it work? So the investment is always dependent. So, and I'll speak specifically for some vendors, right, like Cognosis, we are a cloud-based system, so there's no upfront cost. It's a subscription fee. So, the pricing for that cloud is typically dependent on two main things: is how many things are you locating and how big is your facility. So I think it goes without saying, like, a big facility is more expensive than a small facility, and if you want to track 5,000 assets, that will be more expensive than if you want to track 1,000 assets. But fundamentally, what is consistent, at least for cloud applications, is that you typically don't have an upfront expense. I mean, being very candid, what sometimes if you're a big facility, that upfront expense of installation by itself could equal the actual size of the platform itself. Everything is very dependent upon the size and what you're trying to do. But the things that are consistent are, if it's SaaS, right, there's no upfront cost. In the instance of Cognosis, we actually would do a pilot, so you can try it out beforehand to see if it works the way you're expecting. But the cost is always a tricky question because it goes back to like how many things you're trying to do and then how big is the facility. So it's variable based on what we're talking about. But again, the things that are consistent is no upfront expense, and it's in a SaaS model.
Great. Now, before we wrap up, I've got one more question. What do you regard as the best feature of your system?
Oh, very good. I would say there's in a marketing guy, right? There's not one best feature. There's two good features. So the biggest thing for location AI, and what the benefit of location AI boils down to is the two features, right? Is you don't have to have this enormous amount of hardware to actually stand everything up. And then part two of that is the accuracy. So you get room level accuracy without room level hardware. And that benefit is that you have the accuracy that does par leveling, asset management really, really well without all of the extra expense. And then if you're thinking about from a platform perspective, most applications in RTLS outside of asset management and staff to rest, require room level accuracy. So think about hand hygiene, nurse call, patient workflow, staff workflow. Those all require room level accuracy as well. So you have a system that is now future-proof, right? Because room level accuracy is pretty challenging. So you have a platform that is super light to put in and really accurate, and then is future-proof down the road. So I know that was I'll call it 2.5. So I know you said 1, but 2.5, all for the same reason, being location AI as the location intelligence.
Perfect. So at that point, Jeff, I'd like to thank you so much for a great presentation today. Thank you so much. I'd like to encourage everyone to visit Cognosis's website to learn more about the services they provide to the industry. So please visit cognosis.com. Now, as promised, the answer to today's trivia question is New York City. So congratulations to our winner, Scott Neal in Nebraska. A quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. Now, if you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. If you've missed any of our past webinars, including any by Cognosis, please visit webinarwednesday.live to view our whole webinar archive. We'll be back soon with another webinar, so visit webinarwednesday.live for more details and complimentary registration. Thank you all once again for your time today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a happy Thanksgiving.